I was halfway to my daughter's house for our usual Sunday dinner when my phone vibrated against the passenger seat. Since my wife passed away, those evenings had become rare gifts, quiet reminders that family could still soften an empty home. I expected laughter, familiar faces, and another careful attempt to keep old traditions alive. Instead, I glanced at the screen and saw my lawyer's name. His message was painfully brief. "Don't go inside until you've spoken to me. Everything has changed." My hands tightened around the steering wheel, yet my heartbeat became strangely calmer. Experience had taught me that panic clouds judgment. I pulled into a nearby parking lot and called him immediately. Before I could ask a single question, he said someone inside that house was preparing to make a move involving my late wife's estate. Before that phone call, I believed I understood the shape of my life. I had spent more than 40 years building two things that mattered above everything else: a loving family and the financial stability to protect them long after I was gone. Neither came easily. Every promotion, every late night, every careful investment carried the same purpose. I wanted my wife and daughter to feel safe, never burdened by uncertainty. When my wife passed away, the silence inside our home became almost unbearable. Grief changes ordinary moments into mountains. The only tradition that kept me moving forward was Sunday dinner at my daughter's house. We never spoke about replacing what had been lost. We simply shared a meal, remembered happier days, and allowed familiar routines to carry us through another week. My son-in-law always seemed thoughtful. He offered to handle errands, asked whether I needed help with paperwork, and patiently listened whenever legal matters concerning my wife's estate came up. I appreciated his concern because I believed it came from genuine respect. Trust grows quietly when kindness appears consistent, yet memory has an uncomfortable habit of rearranging itself after the truth begins knocking. Looking back, I remembered conversations ending the moment I entered a room. Sometimes I caught unfinished sentences followed by polite smiles that arrived a little too quickly. My daughter occasionally looked uneasy, as though something weighed heavily on her mind, but she would squeeze my hand, change the subject, and assure me everything was perfectly fine. At the time, I chose peace over suspicion. Families deserve the benefit of trust before they deserve doubt. Still, certain moments lingered longer than they should have. They seemed harmless then. Sitting alone in that parking lot with my lawyer waiting on the other end of the line, those forgotten moments suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. As I sat there replaying the past, details I had dismissed, as ordinary slowly arranged themselves into something impossible to ignore. None of them had seemed alarming on their own. Together, they formed a pattern that no longer felt accidental. My son-in-law had developed an unexpected interest in my finances. He often spoke about making life easier, insisting that transferring ownership of a few properties would simplify future taxes and reduce unnecessary complications. His explanations sounded reasonable because they were delivered with confidence. Never pressure. At least that was how I chose to see them then. My daughter also began encouraging me to sign documents more quickly. She would smile warmly and say, "Dad, you've already discussed everything with the lawyer. There's no need to read every page." Again, I wanted to believe she was simply trying to spare me unnecessary stress. But trust sometimes disguises warning signs until it is almost too late. Then came the calls from my bank. Representatives politely asked whether I had personally authorized several requests connected to my accounts and estate planning. Each time I confirmed only what I truly understood, and each conversation left me with a quiet sense that someone had moved one step ahead without telling me. My lawyer noticed it before I did. During one meeting, he calmly pointed out small inconsistencies between documents that had arrived weeks apart. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make an experienced professional pause. He suggested we verify everything before making additional decisions. I agreed without mentioning my growing unease to anyone. Confrontation without certainty creates more confusion than truth. So I continued attending family dinners, smiling across the table as though nothing had changed. What they did not realize was that every signature request created another piece of evidence. While they believed I remained comfortably unaware, someone else had already begun assembling the entire picture with patient precision. After ending the call with my lawyer, I sat alone for several minutes before driving the remaining distance. My thoughts were steady, but something inside me had already accepted that the evening would not unfold as I had expected. Whatever waited beyond that front door, I intended to meet it with dignity rather than emotion. When I walked inside, everyone greeted me warmly. The dining table was already full, and familiar smells drifted from the kitchen. My daughter hugged me, my grandchildren smiled, and for a brief moment, I wondered whether my lawyer had misunderstood the situation. The comfort almost convinced me to silence my doubts. Then the conversation changed. My son-in-law cleared his throat and smiled with unusual confidence. He said it was finally time to finalize everything concerning the estate so nobody would have unnecessary complications later. Before I could respond, another relative nodded in agreement and casually remarked that I should stop worrying about managing assets at my age because younger hands could handle those responsibilities now. No one asked what I wanted. Every sentence assumed the decision had already been made. As I looked across the table, I noticed several legal folders neatly arranged beside my son-in-law's chair. They had been prepared before I even arrived. My invitation had never been about sharing a meal. It had been about securing my signature. I spoke calmly, asking a few simple questions, yet my words seemed to disappear before reaching anyone's ears. They answered each other instead of answering me. That silence revealed more than any confession could have. In that moment, one truth settled firmly within me. Respect isn't measured by the chair you're offered at the table. It is measured by whether they still value your voice after you've grown older. Their confidence kept growing. Mine became quieter. And quiet confidence is often the last thing arrogant people recognize before everything they planned begins quietly falling apart. Silent strategy and evidence gathering. I thanked everyone for their concern with the same calm voice I had used throughout dinner. No accusation escaped my lips. No frustration crossed my face. If they expected resistance, I refused to give them the satisfaction. Then I apologized politely and stepped outside, saying I needed to return an important phone call. My lawyer answered immediately. His tone carried none of the uncertainty from earlier. He told me the investigation had confirmed what he feared. Several amendments connected to my late wife's estate had recently been submitted, and the signatures on critical pages showed signs of deliberate alteration. Witness statements had already been collected, and surveillance records established who had delivered the paperwork and when it had changed hands. More importantly, he had already filed emergency legal protections. Nothing could be transferred until every disputed document received a full legal review. My family's plans had quietly reached a locked door without anyone inside that dining room realizing it. I thanked him, ended the call, and remained outside for another minute. Anger would have been easy. Patience required far greater discipline. Truth has a way of revealing itself when people believe nobody is paying attention. When I returned, nothing had changed around the table except my understanding of it. Conversations continued naturally. Smiles appeared effortless. Papers waited patiently beside untouched dinner plates. No one suspected that their confidence had already become their greatest weakness. So I watched. Every eager suggestion, every reassuring promise, every glance exchanged across the table settled quietly into my memory. They believed they were guiding an unsuspecting old man toward a signature. What they could not see was that each passing minute gave the truth another opportunity to expose itself without me speaking a single unnecessary word. Several days later, everyone gathered at my lawyer's office, believing we were there to complete the paperwork they had discussed so confidently over dinner. My son-in-law carried himself with the same relaxed certainty I had watched across my daughter's dining table. He greeted everyone politely, exchanged casual conversation, and placed a folder neatly before him. To him, this meeting was simply the final step toward a plan he believed had already succeeded. My lawyer entered without haste. He welcomed everyone, took his seat, and quietly explained that before any documents could be signed, several serious discrepancies required clarification. The room remained comfortable until he opened the first file. One authenticated document was followed by another. Digital records established when estate files had been accessed and altered. Printed emails showed conversations that contradicted earlier explanations. Witness statements confirmed who had submitted amended paperwork. Financial timelines revealed requests that had never been authorized by me. None of the evidence depended upon opinions. It rested entirely upon verified facts collected patiently over several weeks. The confidence around the table began disappearing one careful page at a time. My son-in-law attempted to interrupt more than once, insisting everything had been misunderstood, but every explanation met another authenticated record waiting quietly beneath the next page. The louder his certainty became, the calmer my lawyer remained. I looked toward my daughter. For the first time in months, she could no longer hide behind reassuring smiles. Whether she had knowingly participated or simply allowed herself to believe convenient lies, the weight of reality settled visibly across her face. Regret arrived without dramatic words. Sometimes silence carries far greater honesty than apology. I said almost nothing throughout the meeting. There was no satisfaction in watching people I loved confront their own choices. There was only sadness mixed with relief that truth no longer depended upon my suspicions alone. My silence carried more authority than anger ever could. Finally, my lawyer folded his hands and explained that the evidence supported possible criminal proceedings involving attempted fraud and forged estate amendments. However, he also reminded everyone that certain legal decisions remained mine to make as the injured party. That was the moment they finally understood why I never argued. I had never needed the loudest voice in the room. I only needed the truth to arrive before judgment did. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Legal matters continued through proper channels, but inside my heart another process had already begun. Betrayal leaves wounds that paperwork can never heal, especially when it arrives wearing the face of family. I realize some relationships survive hardship, while others reveal what they were only after hardship arrives. My daughter asked to see me several times. When we finally spoke, she offered no excuses. Her apology was sincere, and I believed her regret was real. Even so, forgiveness and trust are not the same gift. Forgiveness can be offered in a single moment. Trust must be rebuilt through consistent choices, honest actions, and the patience to accept consequences. I protected my late wife's legacy exactly as we had planned together. That brought me peace no court order alone could provide. I refused to let bitterness become the final chapter of a life we had built with love, sacrifice, and quiet determination. Looking back, I understand that justice is strongest when guided by patience instead of anger. Loud victories often fade quickly. Quiet integrity endures. If my story offers anything worth remembering, let it be this. Respect is never guaranteed by blood, age, or shared history. It is earned through character, protected through honesty, and restored only through truth. The greatest victory isn't watching those who betrayed you fall. It's standing so firmly in truth that they can no longer make you kneel.